Hello and welcome to the Miraculous Being series. I'm your host and self-awareness coach Shweta Shibraman, and this is a show where we discover, learn, and implement lessons from others' life journeys. Others who I believe epitomize miraculous in its truest spirit. Individuals who live life to the fullest, who worked hard on themselves to reach where they are, and are passionate in what they do. Today's speaker is Vasudev Murthy. Vasudev is a consultant, aspiring yogi, violinist, author, and an animal rights activist. He's a managing partner at Focal Concepts and the author of 8 books, latest one titled Yoga Sutras Simplified. He's a master facilitator, expert trainer in consulting skills and writing communication, visiting professor of management consulting at IIM Bangalore Institute for Product Leadership after spending many years in consulting companies globally. Let's jump in as we go in to Vasudev's journey and a little more about Yoga Sutras. Hi, Vasudev. Thank you so much for making time to be on the show.
An absolute pleasure, Shweta. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Amazing. So before we kickstart, would you like to share your journey with the audience so that they are up to speed from where we met last week, and then we can take it from there?
Which journey? I'm not sure. There's so many journeys.
Your
But
professional
if you
journey,
mean about
maybe, and then we come into your author
uh,
journey.
professional journey is very boring, but okay, all right, since you insist. Okay, I'm your typical engineer management kind of a guy. I studied at a place called Roorkee, and then I went off to the US and spent a good 10 years there. I picked up a couple of additional degrees. But for the most part, I was an IT geek, like everybody else, I suppose. And then I slowly moved into I did my MBA, and then I moved into management consulting, which was actually probably a better choice for me. Now I think about it. So there I spent some years with what was then called a Big Six, which has become a Big Four now. And Actually, there was a Big Eight, believe it or not, eight and then six and then four. Anyway, so then I came back to India, did a number of things, and the last long stint was with Pro Consulting Services, where I did a lot of consulting activities, where I was head of certain groups, for example, HR, finance, supply chain, and so on. And I was also in charge of operations and recruitment, MBA recruitment. Now, I was also teaching, and I continue to teach at some MBA schools. I was teaching at IIM Bangalore, teaching consulting as a subject from 97 to 2014, if I remember. And then I teach at the Institute for Product Leadership. I teach business communication and what have you. Over the past 10 years, I have my own management consulting firm. So I do a lot of, again, business communication, proposal writing workshops, strategy workshops, and those kinds of things. So that's what I do as far as my profession is concerned. Does that answer your question partially?
Partially, yes. I'm curious about what is the interesting part now.
The interesting part is is all the other stuff that you don't put in a resume, because people wonder. And it's a good thing you ask, because I do wonder what will I do when I grow up. When I grow up, what will I want, what do I want to be? Yeah, right? And I think the possibilities are endless. Now, I have been very interested in animal rights. I was actually an animal welfare officer for some time, investigating cruelty and what have you. Okay, that continues to be a passion. If you receive a cruelty complaint of any kind, any animal in distress, I hope you'll call me and let me know. I can do something about it. That's very important. Then, of course, my yoga journey, which of course we'll talk about very seriously. That was something that really was a remarkable thing, and it's worth talking about. And I look back at it. It was my dad who actually pushed me in that direction. And I guess with my dad I had a classic relationship. Whatever he said, I was opposed to it. We had our little things. But that was a thing that, I have to give him complete credit, that had he not badgered me into going and joining a yoga class in a near a house in Jayanagar, I wouldn't have probably ended up, enjoying yoga like I do every day, 1.5 hours. I spend a whole lot of time. And then writing this book, which will come to later. I'm also a violinist, an average violinist, but I love music quite a lot, and I've been doing it. I've playing the violin since I was a young child. So that has continued. I learned both Carnatic and Hindustani. I teach music as in music theory and whatnot. Of late, I suddenly decided I want to learn the mridangam. So I have a lovely thing going right now, the past 6 or 7 months, where I attend this lovely mridangam class near my place. I have 5 other classmates, They're all about 6 or 7 years old, and I'm obviously the oldest. And I think it's just fun to learn from them. And I'm very envious that they pick up stuff really fast and they do stuff. And I'm very proud of them, as a matter of fact. Not envy would not be the right thing. I'm just proud of them because they like like little children. But we have a great time, and I don't I we call each other our first names. So that's happening. And of late, I've been, I'm about to start learning the Veena. My mother left a legacy behind the Veena, which and I play like I play. But I'm now going to learn formally. Probably the next couple of days, I will be starting my Veena journey as well. So lots of things, on my plate, and every day is just a wonderful day to start something new. And that's I suppose a quick summary of where I am.
Amazing. I can understand why you were saying that this is more interesting than the straight laid out path of the professional work.
But yeah, it's I know I whether you're recording this or not, I don't know. But I'm just telling you, the Veena part has really got me really going, because when I was a small child, Shweta, I obviously we're talking about a time pre-TV, even pre everything. I used to come back from my school. I used to study at a place called Central School, Malaysia, Kendriya Vidyalaya. You obviously, I'm sure, heard of it, right? I used to walk back home, and my mother would be at home with one of my sisters, or just by herself, and she'd be playing on the veena or she'd be singing. And I was a tiny little fellow, and I used to sit down and pretend I was a great, Vidwan accompanying her. I had a little box. I would pretend I was playing the Tangam. So it was a very, very lovely memory because, obviously my mother was a great influence. And then I wanted to learn the violin. Nobody ever forced me. Nobody said you must learn the violin. So that was good because, it came from within. So I have very good memories of my mother. The role of mothers in molding. I mean, I'm not the first person to say anything, but it's so extraordinary what she has done for me in influencing me. Even the way I look at practically everything. Sometimes I feel it's a mother looking at the world, not me. But she used to take me to all these places for concerts, and it was a great gift. And she used to tell me, one day music will be, your friend. And those words I didn't understand then, but I certainly get it now. Anyway, let me not get off on a tangent there. Please go ahead.
Not at all. No, I think that was. I think that's very beautiful. I think I read a line somewhere that said, "Motherhood is about including someone that is not you." I think it comes very naturally.
Ah, lovely.
I think it comes very naturally for mothers, and it's a beautiful.
She had a whole library of. She had a whole library of books, which which was again a legacy from her father. So again, coming back from school with no TV, no internet, no nothing, right? So what you do is sat and read books. You're reading books all the time, and these are very unusual, strange books, which published in the 1910s, 1920s, 30s, where it was a different thing. The structure of book, the language used, everything was very different, and obviously that had its own impact. She lived to see one of my books, maybe two of my books getting published, but not all this, of course. Yeah, but continue, please.
Yeah. So good pass to that question that I was anyway going to pose to you about your journey of an author, right? Starting from Indian ragas to Sherlock Holmes to now a book on Yoga Sutras. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it's not that I had this massive strategic plan. Let me not delude myself or delude the user. I think it's a good thing if you are a structured person, which unfortunately I don't think I am. So if you are a structured person, if you have a plan, fantastic. I want to be a writer in this genre. That's a very admirable thing. Unfortunately, I am not like that. Okay. So the music thing, let me start from there since you asked, right? Obviously, the music was always around in my head and whatnot. But it so happened my first book was actually about animal rights. It was a novel in which I had imagined the animal world rebelling against mankind and actually dominating and destroying mankind. I think I see a smile on your face, which sounds like something that could be a dream scenario as well. Yeah, but that's what it was at that point. And when I wrote that book with a lot of passion and all that, it happened that I sent it to a publisher. The publisher said, "Not bad, but can you please make these edits?" I said, "Chalo, no problem, I'll do that." But at that time, exactly the time, I happened to be traveling from Chennai to Bangalore on a train, and I was reading, a book of compositions by the late Pandit Kumar Gandharva. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to his music, and if you haven't, I would advise you to do so because it is what they call, rebellious music. It is while keeping the sanctity of the underlying theme of music and what have you. he explored completely new dimensions because of the way he was. He did a whole lot of experiments with music and extremely dynamic, incorporating folk themes and what have you. So all good. And then I was so moved by what I was reading that I was impelled to write this whole two or three, actually the title presents itself very obviously, What the Rags Told Me. And I took that as an input, and I churned out three chapters of imagining this gentleman with a tanpura meditating. He is meditating, and as he meditates, the esoteric personifications of these three or four rags come to him and explain their relevance to him at that stage of life. So, for example, if it's just loneliness, or he's got a daughter who's about to leave, and then the rag called Chandrakons, which fits that of having a young daughter on the verge of womanhood, for example, or when you lost a loved one and you're grieving by yourself at 3 or 4 in the morning. What do you do? What are the questions you ask? What kind of answers can you expect to help you to deal with something so personal? There I had Charu Kesi come along and explain, that's the Rakko Charu Kesi, explains why its particular structure, the way it says, is what it is. And then, of course, in that same theme, if you understand what I'm saying, going to the very end of Bhairavi, explaining why she's the mother of all rags. So actually, that turned out to be a fair. When I sent the first 3 or 4 chapters to the publisher, they said, Mr. Murthy, nobody cares about animal rights. That's a fact. Unfortunately, I think this is true even today. Nobody really cares, and I think that's a real tragedy. But having said that, from a writing perspective, they said that nobody wants to read about it, and therefore your music, these things that you jotted down casually, have probably got a lot of weight. So that's how that first book came, and then the book took its own life, and the publisher commissioned some wonderful paintings. One of these days, I will point you in that direction. And then the book also got translated into Kannada, and as we speak, it will come out as a Hindi translation in about a month and a half, from somebody in Indore. So that is as far as that is concerned. But then, as we talked about earlier, I also have this other life as a professional. To make a living, so to say. So then I wrote this book on proposal writing. It's a very dry area, but that was part of what I used to teach as consulting. So then a publisher reached out to me and said, "This is a niche area which nobody writes about. Can you write it?" So I wrote about a book on proposal writing. So if there's a need for you to write a proposal, well, that's a book there. Of course, it is a bit outmoded now. Nevertheless, it had its own place. Then I had a collection of 30 short stories that I wrote this book called Sherlock Holmes in Japan, which incidentally was the output of a collective writing process. So if someone's listening to this video and feels that I'd like to write as well, I think one of the things that happens is to keep yourself humble and collect a bunch of like-minded people and do what we call group, well, not therapy but group writing. Right? Let's say I say Shweta, 3 or 4 friends, we all sit together and we give each other some kind of I don't know, targets. Let's write 200 words on, let's say, romance or horror, or let's do a new murder, whatever it is. So in that process, that group momentum causes good things to happen. First of all, it keeps you on your toes. It refines your writing. You learn the fine art of critiquing, even though you may say I have no background in critiquing, which is important actually. So in one of those exercises, which we used to do in this large group of about 20 of us from around the world, pre-Facebook times. So then, the idea was, can we write in the voice of somebody else? So, for example, if I were to say, Shweta, why don't you write in the voice of, I don't know, let's say, Margaret Thatcher, for example, or let's say Rishi Sunak or something. Now, it sounds intriguing, and it's worth a try, because you're forced to put yourself into the person's head and try to imagine that this is how I look at the world, and we all look at the world differently, clearly. And I've done that in a separate way. I actually have four pseudonyms. Well, four names under which I write. One myself. One is this Japanese character. One is this old retired English professor in the middle of Saudi Arabia. And one is a very, very old, African American lady in the deep south of the United States. So when you say that's how you're going to be, then your words have a different flavor. It's a very good exercise, very good exercise. And then you discover why people like to write under assumed names. It's a very nice thing to do, because it gives you a freedom, a new stylistic approach. And some backhanded compliments I have also received. I don't know if there's a compliment or they're trying to tell me something. A couple of wise guys told me that those guys, that is my alter egos, or write better than you do. So the same person, but writing in a different style. And so I don't know whether to punch the guy or say thank you, whatever it is. Anyway, so Sherlock Holmes in Japan came out like that because I chose to write as Arthur Conan Doyle, and at that time, because of my past experiences, I had this thing going with Japan. So then the title again presents itself first. I said, how do I connect Japan and Sherlock Holmes? So I wrote it, and a long story short, but HarperCollins picked it up and they found it quite credible, and they published it. Then they passed on, they sold the rights of the book to somebody in Portugal, somebody in Japan, and somebody in the US. And then it got a life of its own in the sense of translations. And then Sherlock Holmes at Timbuktu came because the US publisher wanted me to write exclusively for them. And then we selected a place called Timbuktu, which was a fantastic idea because I had to research. And I love research, I think, yes. And I connected, believe it or not, Calicut with Timbuktu. Calicut, our Calicut. Yeah, there is actually a lot of stuff. Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo both visited Calicut. So I was able to find that out, the fact, and I said, how do I connect all of it? And that's where, when you meld a little fact, a little fiction, you can come up with some very interesting stuff. So that was the other book. Then again, back to my profession, I wrote this book on how organizations really work, which was published by Bloomsbury. It's about theory and practice of the way we function. What you learn in MBA school is good, but as you and I know, it's never enough. You need to know the real facts that actually emerge. So whether it's, let's say, corruption, or whether it's favoritism or sexual harassment, no MBA course is going to teach you that. It's something you learn because of that's the world it is. But so then I created this book, and I have to say it was actually, again, I thought I had researched it well. Bloomsbury published it. They felt it some solid content. Then subsequently, I wrote this completely insane book, which was a parody of the literary world, including myself. Okay, so I made fun of poets, publishers, writers, everybody. See, the art of writing absurdity, Shweta, is a very interesting exercise. The more wacky your ideas, if can you translate them into writing and evoke, something from the reader. So in this particular case, because of the history of what had happened to me once, I wrote this thing about, literary festivals and what they are. I claim it's a massive conspiracy, between publishers, samosa makers, and manufacturers of phosphorescent underwear. Now, is there any logic to it? Obviously, there isn't. And that's the point. Why should everything be logical and rational and sophisticated? Why don't we just have some plain, ridiculous, absurd fun? I don't see any reason why not. So that's what happened. And obviously, when I gave the publisher, whatever I'm going to say, if I'm accusing them of such crimes. So it went through a couple of well, I won't say rejections, but I think some were not pleased. But finally, it was published by HarperCollins. That's the thing. And now coming back to Yoga Sutra, shall I talk about it now, or do you want to? Yeah. Okay. So during the pandemic, Jayco reached out to me. Jayco, there was a gentleman called Mr. Akash Shah, who's a publisher, who's the owner, I suppose, of Jayco. He knows me. Rather, we know each other, kind of acquaintances. And he said there was a need for someone to write a book on the Yoga Sutras for the mass market. I mean, the longer conversation, but basically that was what it was. The more I thought about it, I understood the point that many of our fantastic classical texts remain on bookshelves because they were not written for the reader. Now, I'm making a very strong statement, but hear me out. The point is, if I'm a very wise person, I know a particular subject area, yes, I will write about it. I'll write a book and say, this is my wisdom about it, and I'll let it be. But do we keep the reader in mind when we write the book? I think, generally speaking, no. Generally speaking, you may say it's the genre is this, etc. But I hardly have a statue of a potential reader in front of me and say, I'm writing for you. How do you assimilate stuff? What are your reading patterns? What language do you prefer? How has your reading style changed? We never ask those questions. We're only obsessed by the writer and his, a pompous impression about himself, right? So I got the point that the mass market means that you need to be humble enough, yet without making a mockery of whatever you're trying to write about. How do you write in simple ways to convey. And writing in a simple way is very difficult, as you and I know, and it doesn't come easily. It doesn't, and it needs the expert guiding hand of an editor as well. And this is a point which I also want to make, that I had a fantastic editor. All praise to her. She was a very, very fine person, and guided me very, very well. I'm eternally grateful to her. But yes, so we did a couple of rounds. I said, okay, let me try. So I have to confess that yes, I had read the Yoga Sutras, but obviously not with the idea of really absorbing it and suddenly rewriting it or reinterpreting it and so on. So I did a couple of tries, okay, and both failed, because what I was doing was actually doing the same thing that the others have written about, and great people have written about it. Do not mistake anything I'm saying as a negation or saying something negative about great people like Vivekananda and B.K. Sanger. Not at all. Their wisdom is profound. Everyone who reads my book should also read their books, honestly. Okay, it's just fabulous stuff. And there's a great American professor, Edwin Bryant. His book on the Yoga Sutra is just wonderful. But they are all very deep. They are very, they assume, probably rightly so, that the reader already has some kind of a inkling about certain kinds of concepts. So the idea is, let's not assume that that's the readership. Let's assume it's a common man, whatever a common man is. I am a common man. So how would I read such a book? I might buy it as I'm just, going through a bookstore. I pick up something. Hey, Yoga Sutra sounds cool. Let me read it. Now, if the first few pages don't capture my attention, the book is going to go on the bookshelf, and it'll remain there as food for cockroaches, as food for termites. It's never going to be read, because a writer has failed to connect with the reader in the first few pages. How does that connection happen? It is by removing all the things which are acting as road bumps. For example, a typical classic text will take it as lines, as shloka by shloka or sutra by sutra. Line 1, blah blah blah, in Devanagari and Sanskrit, to be followed by an interpretation as the writer believes, and then move on to line 2, which is also in Devanagari and Sanskrit, and so on. So that is the typical movement. Nothing wrong with it. It's a very, very logical way of doing it, and if some people want it that way, fine. But it does not necessarily collectively present the idea that is being represented. So what we did was, I said, I'm going to take it in a completely different way. I'm going to write about it as a seeker, as a person who's not on a hilltop already looking down and giving advice to people. I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to be collecting all, the central theme of a collection, let's say of 5 or 10 or 15 sutras together. What is the point of, what are they as a collective saying, right? And then the entire Yoga Sutras actually in my book, as you would have seen, is in the appendix. So that it doesn't distract the reader as they're going through. That's the first thing. Second is trying to give personal examples to show my own imperfection. That's important. If I suddenly say I'm a Swamiji, I've opened up my own little thing, I'm again unnecessarily putting a distance between me and the reader. So that's not the case anyway. And then connecting, so then graphics. The use of graphics to convey idea is sorely underestimated, or rather underappreciated. That's a better word. Graphics get the point. So I said we should do that. And most of our classic texts, except for certain, yantras and all those kinds of things, esoteric diagrams, they don't actually explain an idea through graphics. So I think that was something novel, and I found a very bright young lady in Canada who helped me with that project. It helps because the reader wants to break the monotony of reading continuous text. They like white space. They like shorter paragraphs. They like shorter sentences. This I have learned because I teach business communications also. So getting those points over here is also important. I want to also share with you one very important thing in business communication. The hot topic that I have taught these consulting firms or consultants has been something called the Barbara Minto's pyramid principle. Okay. The Barbara Minto principle says that, have you heard of it, by the way? I don't know if you have, but if not, let me just share with you. She says, get to the point first. Okay, simple words. But how does it come about? It comes from this way. It comes from the fact that she noticed that, when consultants presented reports to their clients, they were fat documents, and the conclusion, they started with the preamble. This is a sad situation. Here's the data. Here, what a blah, 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 blah. And then finally, at the end on page 40 is where the basic result, what the CEO really wanted, is there. Now, because of this nature of writing, which is the way all of us have learned how to write essays, this is a classical way of reading. But it does not take into account the fact that readers don't have time, and we don't have the time to sit and read 40 pages. We want to know what do you want to say. Then let me figure out whether I want to invest that time in reading the rest of your thick report. So she then recommended you start with the end first. What is your point? Your point is that global warming is going to destroy all of us. Fine. That is the point. Now we'll break it down into the reasons why you say reason one, reason two, reason three. The pyramid is opening up, and then give more data, etc., and come to a simple conclusion. Because that's the way you hook the reader. Okay. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is because if you look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he had discovered this 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So he starts with the definition of yoga in line 2, actually, or line 1, depending on how you look at it. He doesn't wait for the 195 sutra to say, okay, now I hope you guys have got it, and this is what yoga is all about. He doesn't do that because he wants to get it first. Then he expands it along this way. So to me, this master communicator had figured out everything. This is how to make it an interesting hook to people. In our classic management lingo, which I'm sure both of us share, like I said, right? So this is the executive summary. Okay, then some details, the structure, methodology, or what do you want to call it? That's the second one, the sadhana pada. Then risks and mitigation or things to watch out for. That's the vibhuti pada, which is a very interesting one. And then finally, kind of a wrapping up summary for the advanced reader, which is the Kaivalya pada. So what I'm trying to say is the structuring was so wonderful that I was just lost in admiration. The guy was a master communicator, the greatest intellectual. He has defined. It's been a definitive narration or a kind of foundational principle of Indian civilization, whether we like it or not. As the greatest export, soft export, hard export from India. Right? That's why we get so much of respect. So he had figured things out, and so that I hope I've summarized everything here. But that's what I did. So I just put 10 to 15 sutras together, used graphics, used this thing of what is my takeaway in management language. Again, Shweta, since both of us are from there, what's the takeaway from this meeting? And then we say 1, 2, 3, and that's what we have here as well. So I'm saying for the reader, I have 3 takeaways per chapter, so that they feel that okay. So this is what this is all about, right? I have 8 chapters, so each of them 3 points or 24 points. So if you go through it as an easy read, looking at how I as the writer fumbled and messed things up, and found something beautiful, and tried to bring analogies, references to music. Hopefully, I would have gotten my point across. Does this help?
Yeah.
A long answer. My goodness.
Not at all. Absolutely. Loved hearing it. And I think it's a mammoth task, right? To simplify something as profound as the Yoga Sutras and something that's been talked about, right? Like so many commentators after commentators. But I love how you approach keeping the reader at the center and saying, what is it that they need? And, how can you simplify it from their standpoint? And obviously, if they want to delve deeper, there are a million other commentators that
absolutely
can always keep going back to. But at least this gives them the essence. And what I really appreciated was the very conversational language, right? Like it was almost like it was like talking to you, right? As soon as I picked up the book, it was almost like we were sitting and have a coffee table conversation, because that was how simple it is to read. And I think, like you said, I think simplifying is much difficult a task. So kudos to you for having managed that. And
very kind of you. But it wasn't easy. Of course, now it's there. I just want to add a passing thing.
Yeah.
Many places where I stumbled or froze. Why did I freeze? Because some of the concepts are indeed very, very difficult, very new to me, and very difficult to actually absorb. Luckily, I had this fantastic person to lean on, Acharya Bal Yogi in Pondicherry. So he was my guide in those difficult times and I accepted it. It's a fact. He's great. He himself has written the interpretation. So it's not easy. And then again, for example, the concept of time, breaking completely all our notions of what time is all about. And it's so difficult. For example, if I were to say, Shweta, tell me what are the boundaries of space? I'm just giving you an example of that, right? That's a question our brain is not currently wired to handle. We can't accept. We can't understand. If I ask you, can you trace the beginning of time and the end of time? I don't think you can. I certainly can't. Right? So some profound concepts we are just not capable at our end of understanding. But the way he defines time as not even this, as something else, claiming there's no such thing as time in the sense that you and I think about. Now that's certainly, a googly that you don't know what to do about. And then by the time I figured it out and tried my best to write about it, it took some doing. Yeah. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I really appreciate it, and it's such uh, I don't know, it's a profound way of simplifying what is very, very deep. And I know my answer to it, but I would love to hear from you, right? I think Yoga Sutras were written centuries ago, and a lot of us who've read it know that it's a timeless text. But how do you see the relevance of the Yoga Sutras in modern
It is.
times?
Well, it's not that it was written only for those times. And in fact, we just had a little discussion on the concept of time itself just a few seconds ago, right? What does he say? Yoga, he says, is the stilling of the mind. Now that's very, very, I'm not the first person to be completely, taken aback by that point. Stilling of the mind. Don't think. Keep a blank mind. It's practically impossible. And in fact, most of us like to say, "Oh, I'm such a thinker. My mind is always running around." We think it's a great compliment to ourselves, but actually, it's not, right? We live in a time of constant chaos. We revel in it. Our entire life, from beginning to end, is about thoughts, relationships, success, failures, and our mind seems to be. That's what it is. But our ability to actually keep things in perspective. I have this dramatic statement I make. I pretend once in a while to be a great philosopher. It's a fraud thing that I do. Okay, so I tell people, life is a blink of light between two voids. Sounds cool, right? Sounds wonderful. So the thing is, he explains to us, that we have come from somewhere, we are going somewhere else, and the whole business of reincarnation, karma, etc., are very well explained. Now, given today's times, where as it is, we can't focus on any subject for even four and a half minutes. Probably even now, while you're talking to me and I'm talking to you, even though we're trying to have a very focused conversation, I would not be surprised if along the way, and with no fault of yours or mine, our thoughts have actually gone in some other direction, thinking about, you were talking about the guy who's upstairs drilling, and I'm thinking about some dog of mine who's so we can't help it. We have these parallel thoughts happening, and given the fact that today we are assaulted by digital information like crazy, right? It is really difficult. So and then everyone's now a mental health expert, as you're aware, right? And this is a problem, because without intending to, people are actually realizing that people are breaking down, and that COVID business, brought everything to people suddenly started realizing the frailty of life, the short period of what constitutes life, where everyone became getting into organic farming, or they started going to the Himalayas to discover themselves. So all that started happening. People actually want to find out, why am I here? What am I doing? Why do I need to have a corporate, heart attack to define success? I don't need to do that. So I think people actually want help. And therefore, when this book, when I say it's for the mass market, there's nothing wrong with it. It can possibly help you. Why am I here? The answer is there. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I repeatedly making the same blunders? Right? So rather than having a complex Western interpretation of what this is all about, now you have a more, index, so to say, a reference to go back to and say, really, now that makes sense. There's something that I have done, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I can find ways to stop doing my traditional knee-jerk, responses to situations. So, for example, anger management. Now, all of us keep on blabbering about emotional intelligence, as you know, right? We say emotional intelligence. We understand. It is about figuring out what am I feeling right now. That's the first step. Second step is to do something about it, right? Well, that's the thing. He talks about all this. He doesn't call it emotional intelligence, but that's exactly what he's talking about. So I'm saying that in today's world, it is even more relevant and actually even more obvious than what it might have been then. We want, like when we were talking earlier, I was telling you about my multiple interests in everything. It might look interesting, but the fact of the matter is I'm also a victim of what I was just saying. I seem to want my mind to be constantly stimulated, even though I'm trying my best. Right? I do my yoga of 1.5 hours diligently, day after day, without a break. No matter, in fact, when I don't feel like doing yoga, that's exactly when I do yoga as a kind of a challenge to myself. So it is a constant battle. It's a constant struggle. Some days you do achieve those microseconds of complete peace, and some days you don't. So I think somehow the Yoga Sutras were written, and they're for people like us who are constantly comparing ourselves with others, who always defining our success with reference to somebody else. Somebody's making more money, somebody's got a brilliant title, somebody's doing that. So this whole and therefore, whenever we experience that, we must stop and think that it's my ego talking, right? And even that small realization can have a perfectly calming, impact on us. So yes, the 8 steps of yoga make perfect sense today, and I'm happy to say that I think a lot of people are actually searching for it. People do approach me. I don't think I'm a yoga teacher in the conventional sense, so I don't teach. But I know others who do, and they're doing a pretty good job. And hats off to them. They're talking about the whole 9 yards. 9 yards are the eight limbs. So people are interested in that. So it's still relevant. Bottom line is still relevant for the reasons I mentioned.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, yeah, today there is at least more awareness that yoga is more than asana, right? And that's something even I didn't know 2 years ago. That's what I remember
It
telling
is.
when someone in Kaivaridam asked me saying that, do you practice yoga? And I said, I don't do asanas every day, but I meditate. And the guy just laughed and he's like, why is meditation not part of yoga? Right? Because our streamlined
Yeah,
understanding
yeah.
was that only asanas is yoga, right? So if you don't get on the mat, is it really yoga? So I think now that awareness is there, that there is more than asana, and there is all of these angas that you can actually practice and benefit from. And I love what you said about this, just the awareness that the ego is in action can be a great starting point, right? And I thought we can go into the whole aspect of ego, right? I think all of us go into that whole sense of
Okay.
asmita, I, me, myself. And I think it starts from a very young age, right? I often wonder when that
It does.
whole
It does.
sense of self actually formed, but we have that notion of ourself and keep preserving that sense of self from a very young age. So curious to hear, I just read your story on egoism in the book as well, but would love to hear you share, uh, obviously the ego has a role to play, but where do we draw that line, and how do we live in the world but not of the world?
Look, I think it's a really an incredible battle. And let me not simplify it by saying that I can give you a 1 minute discourse and your ego will be destroyed. It's not going to happen. In fact, though of course this is for the mass market, I just want to make a point that I don't think this book should be read by very young people. The Yoga Sutras. I'm talking about, let's say, till they're about 18 or 19. The reason I say that is because they have to experience life. It's not fair on us, our old adults, to impose our, you know, exalted opinions about on younger people who are just experiencing and enjoying life right now, right? Yes, it is. They are also indeed playing out the karmic thing from previous. It is a fact, right? And they are the sense of self. I am so and so. I am this person. All that stuff is actually it's there. I can't tell a 5-year-old child or a 15-year-old person, don't think of your ego. I mean, they're not interested in these kinds of things. It's just not fair. And everything we do in life, seems to be always a constant thing about coming first, getting a job. It's about I. So when you're inundated with these zillions and zillions of complex, stimulants to caress and nurture and fertilize your ego, how are you going to pull yourself out of that quicksand and suddenly say, off with me? I think it's really very difficult, Shweta. I really don't know. I mean, I also can't say that I'm out from it. Once in a while you do it, and well, easy tests. Okay, easy tests. You see someone in distress, go and help that person, and then don't talk about it. Don't talk about the fact that I helped somebody in distress. And that is why, from helping animals, I really want to come out animals, okay? Because we greatly pride ourselves as the apex of creation, and I've written in a book also. And I don't feel that's the case at all. I think it's we probably I mean, whatever we have, whether it's jealousy or the kinds of insecurities we have, animals are actually about that. And I don't think I'm making a frivolous point here. I'm saying they have reached a sense of profound sense of they live for now, and so they're probably more evolved in that sense. What I'm trying to say is, therefore, helping a person who cannot even say thanks, and then not talking about, not advertising about it. No, specific things you can do to control the impulse to reflect on yourself and be, feel warm about how wonderful, incredible, and sensational I am. We have to make those steps. But I'll tell you, for every two steps we take in that direction and actually achieve something, we probably come back one or two or even three steps back. It's really a complex battle, which is why that whole understanding of the sequencing of the Yoga Sutras is actually very, very important, because starting from that yama, which external behavior, niyama, to the rules we impose on ourselves of how we should be, non-coveting, non all the stuff. So that's the first two steps. So your mind is already now started, becoming mellow. Then you're looking after your body, because the ultimate objective is what is, you talked about meditation, which will come much later. So that's the next obvious step. The third is the most subtle thing of breath management, right? And realizing my body is actually fundamentally, body and its experiences are fundamentally useless. Done. So that's breathing, you look at it. Then comes that bridge, pratyahara bridge, which is actually to some extent the thing that seems to define the identity. The how I smell, how I listen. Again, all those five things are feeding myself of sense, a sense of self rather, right? I am listening, I am hearing, I am tasting. So that's why pratyahara is a withdrawal. How do you take them out of commission so that you're not, involved with the outer world? Very profound thoughts, very, very profound thoughts. So even navigating those five, angas repeatedly and failing again and again, I'm afraid that's just got to be done. Then at certain points, yes, you move into dharana, which is interrupted concentration, and dhyana, which is absorption, and samadhi, which is absorption. That can happen. But as I have seen in my own asana practice, this is not necessarily only linear, it goes back and forth. Now I'll give you an example. Uh, in asana practice, okay, there are some which call for balance. And for me, the Shishasana thing is absolutely no problem. Oddly enough, the problem I have is with the single leg, balance. Okay, so there are a number of things you can do. So Vrikshasana as an example, and there are some others as well. I have discovered, and not a great discovery, is that if your mind is actually churning and processing some stuff which you haven't resolved, your sense of balance is shaky. You actually fall off and can hurt yourself. But if you actually for a long time, okay. So clearly these things are indeed linked, and that's when this whole business of I am nobody, I'm just part of the universe, I'm just insignificant part. You can humbly accept those things and not feel bad about it. But having said that, I'll say that those moments are far and far few in between. They're very. It doesn't happen very often because there's always some stimulant to the ego just coming around the corner. So anyway, it's a battle, but it's a battle worth fighting.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Honestly, I think it's always a struggle, and the question that came to me was, it's a hard path and it's a long path, right? Because we need to keep unlearning again and again and again. How does one keep on the path, right? How does one really stay on the path?
Yeah. So in this, one of the things in the Yoga Sutra, and I can't remember which part it is. I think somewhere in the first, maybe 35 or 36, or the first Samadhi Pada, he just says that this is a matter of repeated practice. Okay, in the sense of it can be intense, it can be moderate, or it can be slow. Now, this particular personal discipline actually yields dividends. And I said this a few minutes ago. I said, by insisting that you have to get on that mat, I'm just talking about asanas for now, but the point is across the board. By insisting that you have to get on that mat and spend 1 hour every day, that personal discipline does help. It puts things in perspective. Then when I go into the yama, niyama, etc., I do indeed feel the need to improve in certain areas. And not only certain areas, I mean, I have a whole lot of things to improve on. But there's a great acknowledgement that, I'm really imperfect, I need to do something about it. It really, humbles you. It just destroys your ego, at least erodes it to some extent. So I think, unfortunately, the answer is not about reading books necessarily, but it's about relentless practice in anything you do for that matter. Now, take an example of even the violin, or let's say singing, or let's say playing the veena, which I'm trying to do now. In my experience, and I said nobody knows much about me as a musician, and I'm just an average person. But having said that, all of us will go through certain patches where our musicality is very good, and we acknowledge it ourselves and we feel proud of it. Again, it's the ego. Now, having said that, and I'm assuming you have some knowledge of music, if you sometimes can hold just one note alone without any melody, that peace and that kind of beautiful happiness that you get from it, where the ego's not there. It's not about you. You've somehow attained this fabulous, connection with the universe. Even if it's momentary, even if it's 3 seconds or 4 seconds, that vibration of that tanpura, when it clicks and you're with it, your voice is with it, everything's explained. So unfortunately, I think the answer is for everything, whichever type of yoga you're trying to do, relentless practice for years will yield that momentary, profound flash of beauty, which will justify all those years of practice.
Beautifully said. And I remember what you said earlier, right? That when feeling a more resistance, you have to doubly ensure that you get on the mat, right? And I think this goes against the very fundamental principle of today's generation of instant gratification, right? Because you may or may not get some momentary peace, and when or how you do not know, but you have to keep the relentless practice on. So I think it's a very different way for us to function. To really be patient, whether or not we see results. It's a hard game.
Yeah. So again, if the idea of doing the yoga practices to get results, that's again a self-defeating. That actually doesn't make any sense. But again, I don't want to sound like a wise guy. I actually am not. Okay, not a wise guy. These things emerge over time, and repeatedly getting beaten up in life. That's when these things suddenly start making the cobwebs start getting things. That's when you realize this is actually probably what it's about. But till then, it's an endless fertilizing of your ego, sadly enough.
Yeah, true, very true. That is a form of asmita, right? It's amazing how it keeps coming. Like, just when you think that you have a grip on your ego, I think it comes in a even more camouflaged, subtle way, and you don't even recognize how it has caught you in its web.
And in fact, in the Vibhuti-pada, he talks about this. He says that advanced yogi who has mastered all these things, or thinks he has mastered it, will achieve great powers of time travel, of understanding somebody's karmic past, of walking on water. He mentions a lot of what is I guess magic, you can call it, and whatever you want to call it. And he says that's exactly the point where a yogi is likely to get distracted, because he feels, oh wow, I'm such a cool guy, and that's when he gets overwhelmed by all these powers he has, and he just falls out of that whole thing. It's a butter churn example, which when you do butter, when you churn butter, the nice tasty stuff sticks to the edges of the vessel, but the most unappetizing or not very interesting stuff is that what they call the whey, right? Is left the liquid. That's the real deal. This is the distraction.
Yeah, very interesting analogy. Yeah. We need to keep the eye on the ball instead of getting distracted. Right? Beautiful. And I think as we start talking about this, right, I think one of the very beautiful lines that you wrote, I really enjoyed. It was like almost poetry in prose, where you said that sorrow is disguised as transient happiness. I think that's such a powerful statement. I'd love to hear from you, the many ways we get trapped under that transient happiness.
Yes, our job, as we are trained from the very beginning, is to seek happiness. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. In the sense, I won't say, why are you being happy? Why are you actually unhappy? I wouldn't say that to someone. I wouldn't do that. The point that he's saying is that when you experience that form of happiness, whatever it is that you're doing, it's somebody you like, or something you ate, then the mind craves for a repetition of that experience, right? And when it is finally found that you can't have that experience again, then sorrow comes along and it hits you really badly. That is like this, that is the actual point, right? So if you recognize this, that this is all, intended to mislead you, and my friend, sooner or later you're not going to have that pizza or that person you crave for, or whatever it is. I'm sorry, it's not it's not going to happen, or whatever it is. That's when it really hits you. So again, I don't think I would say this to anybody and say, you think you're happy, but actually you're unhappy. I wouldn't do that. But I think that's the point he's actually made there. And it's unfortunately a very crushing thought, sad thought, but it's true, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what else to say. But I wouldn't say that a child should not experience happiness. I wouldn't say either of us should have. It's fine. But if you're able to also develop the capacity to understand that this is, don't get carried away with this happiness, well, then you can probably manage quite okay. Then, yeah, we're trapped in this cycle of repeated actions. We drag those actions again and again and again. It's like this circle, right? Which I've talked about, which he's talked about, which I've tried to interpret.
Yeah, very true, very true. I'm drawing parallels with the Bhagavad Gita also in chapter 3, where we go into that, right? That there is a desire, and then desire, if it gets obstructed, we get angry, and that anger leads to, wrath, and then we get caught in that cycle, and it's hard to get out of it. And yeah, I guess creating that distance between that desire and again that sense of self, right? Because a lot of times we kind of merge that sense of accomplishment to that sense of self, that we are worthy only if we get that promotion, or we drive that BMW, or whatever it is, right, that we desire, and we get caught in that same trap. Yeah.
Well, if you look at it these days, the hot news that you and I am sure are reading is about the UPSC results, right? Everything you turn to is about, so and so on this village did this, and now we got 78th rank. So there are all these success stories which are guiding us in that direction. That I also want to be like that person. So yeah, I want to be as happy as that person seems to be. So yeah, unfortunately, we are trapped in that chakravyuh, as they call it.
Yeah. And this brings me to that interesting part, which you also mentioned in the book, right? About you being a management consultant, whining and dining, and then, walking the path of yoga and suddenly moving to austerity and minimalism and, tapas, as we call it in our journey. So I'm just curious, how was that journey for you? And if someone is still caught in that worldly race, where would you say they start?
Okay, so this is a very, very profound question. I know you smiled and asked that question, but I want to tell you that yes, initially it's like a reaffirmation of what a cool guy I am, and I want to do these things to again and again remind myself of how cool I am. That's one way of looking at it. But if indeed you have been fortunate enough, I guess I would say I was fortunate enough to somehow encounter the Yoga Sutras and bring myself crashing down on the world, on the earth. Another way to look at it is that it's a form of duty. Now, I'll define it without trying to, appear like I'm talking nonsense. The two ways of looking at it is: one is duty to those who who depend on you, whether they like it or not. I mean, whether they are spiritually out there or not, or whatever. But there are people who may be dependent on you, and therefore, I cannot engage in a spiritual conversation with them and tell them not to be. So that would be very cruel to do so. That is really not fair. That's one way. The second thing to do, which I think I needed a couple of friends to tell me this is, So for example, and before I talk about management consulting, I'll talk about music, and I'll connect it. So like I said, I was very fortunate to be given music or some knowledge of music by some great people. It is my fortune. It is not that I was such a cool guy. I'm very aware at this moment that chance brought me to their feet. They gave me this knowledge. Okay. Without that knowledge, I am actually nobody. Now, having said that, what happened during the COVID period was one of my friends said, look, we all are sitting and wasting our time. Why don't you just teach us some music? And I had never actually taught vocal music before. I'm a violinist. At the most, I might teach the violin, and even that is a difficult thing to do because many people don't have the patience to learn the violin. But be that as it may, somebody said, "Why don't you teach us, basics of music?" And I've never done that ever. I said, "Sure, let me give it a shot." So I started teaching, And well, word spread that this is guy, crazy fellow in Bangalore. He will teach music for nothing. Because I was not willing to take charge. So I started teaching. I had some 20, 25 people in no time at all. I would spend all my time, teaching. And then, so that was one. Going back to this business of management consulting itself, in both the cases, you may possess some knowledge, okay? And the idea then is don't keep it to yourself, give it away. Now, the give it away might be, does it mean free? Now, I used to think free, and again, that is also a destructive thing because unfortunately, the reality is, and even in our ancient system, they say you can't take it free. You have to give Guru Dakshina. That's how they called it. So the question is, if I happen to be fortunate enough to know something because of my own idea, or I somehow read about it and became an expert about it, then is it not my duty to pass on that knowledge of whatever this music or concepts or it to somebody? That's how I justify it. Okay. One from a point of view of duty, the other of giving away whatever you may know, because ultimately you're not going to take it with you. So the more you jettison in whichever form, formal, informal, whether it's monetized, non-monetized, give it away. But again, if you're hung up with the monetizing part for its own reasons, then again you're in trouble. But I think, frankly, I've made some modest progress in that direction. I'm able to somehow, I'm managing. Let's put it that way.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think I want to move into that question about, I've seen many of your articles written where you talk about how leadership can be enhanced through, just the knowledge of yoga and using some principles or being that yogi as a leader as well. And I'm curious about your thoughts. How do the two merge and how can we really be that yogi leader or leader yogi, however you'd like to phrase it?
Yeah, sure. Good. Thanks for reading the article and for the question. Now, again, most highly driven individuals who either call themselves leaders or aspire to be leaders or what have you, live fast track lives, and they have these moments of they step back and say, what is life all about? And 27 steps to leadership and what have you. So earlier, I used to experiment during my own leadership workshops that I used to do. I used to have these yogasana sessions as an option. I used to give it an option that if you want to come early in the morning tomorrow. So typically only 10% of participants or 20% would show up, and then we would go through the mechanics of doing that and trying to do something. So that was then, right? Then over the past number of years, there's also been a great appreciation for the fact that very, very young people tasting success at very young ages suddenly drop dead. I think you know quite a number of cases, and those people. I mean, I used to know when I was at a different place, a 30-year-old boy who just had a heart attack, and I think you also probably know several such cases. So I think, generally speaking, though people love being successful, and all that is true, but there's a tacit and understanding and appreciation. We need to look after ourselves. So talking to them about keeping your body fit is easy. They get it, right? And of course, most people, 95 or 99% of people are actually very, very unfit. They have prematurely aged and they know it. They're stiff. They can't do anything. So that conversation is easy to have in the sense people understand it. Now, the larger question of which you had also alluded to, the larger issues of the ego and all that, yama, niyama, those are also something that people are understanding that I need to detach myself a little bit from whatever is happening, and the whole business of I need to detach myself from the results. Very, very, very difficult. I mean, again, by definition, a leader is profoundly aware of his or her intelligence, knows that they are highly driven persons who get results. Yet you're asking that same person to be detached from that and from the end result and only do your duty. This is the old Bhagavad Gita kind of principle, nothing new that I'm saying. All I'm trying to say is today I think people are willing to listen to these kinds of things. I mentioned to you the other day there's this yoga school academy near Mumbai. You and I know what I'm talking about. So they want to actually integrate it in a specific way. It's not that you do the leadership principles and then suddenly you say, okay, let's go into yoga. No, we are going to be both. And we're going to say that these yogic principles of yoga, of managing your breath. For example, if you are upset, notice that the first thing that is affected is your breath. How do you control your pulse? How do you restrain yourself? How do you stop yourself from response to a situation? That stuff, if you can cultivate that discipline, you really don't go places. And people notice it. People don't want to be near a hyper person who has no control over his tongue and just says whatever the heck they feel like because that's supposed to be leadership. A person who's quiet and thoughtful and tries his best or her best to look at both sides and gives space and actually gets that without much effort, right? What I'm trying to tell you is, I think the time has come now, and people do appreciate it, that the application of yogic principles can lead to a higher quality of leadership, the way you conduct yourself, the glow that you have on your face because you have probably some fundamental realizations that others lack. Management of your breath, you're not always in a hyper mode, screaming, shouting, but you're balanced, you speak well with thought, with care, with compassion. I do believe that now a lot of Indian business schools are actually offering, these things in some manner, May not be the application of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras completely, not necessarily, but I think there is a realization that Indian management can have its own well-defined, difference. Because, while we were doing MBA stuff, we said American management, Japanese management, European management, but Indian management science and systems are also equally profound. And I think they can dip into this limitless reservoir of knowledge and be actually effective, is what I believe.
Yes, absolutely. I think there is a lot more revival of Eastern wisdom in terms of not just the wisdom, but also the applicability of it in today's context. So it's a welcome transition so that we actually embrace our own culture and the knowledge that's there here, right? So I'm curious, Vasudev, what is your biggest takeaway from the Yoga Sutras?
Oh, that's a simply beautiful question. Okay, our insignificance is something that really gets me. Our individual insignificance in the grand scheme of things is humbling to the max, right? In terms of how we are just one atom in the overall scheme of things, how we are in a moment of time which is less than a grain of time, so to say, right? So first of all, it really brings you down to earth. Beautiful that we are part of a larger purpose. Things like that. So it's a collection of things. It's one specific thing, but yes, overall, our fundamental insignificance really gets you. You are just there for a larger purpose. Hopefully, in the next 2 billion, lifetimes, I'll get to where I need to get. That itself is good. So I think all this business that I will get moksha in this janma, and I will receive. Again, those are again to some extent, with due respect to all, an egotistical statement. To imagine that I'm somehow so spiritually advanced, I'm on a fast track of some kind. I'm on a fast track to nirvana or moksha. I think that is highly misleading. I wouldn't agree with that. I think I'm so yeah. So I hope I conveyed my point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was very beautiful. And I think in today's day where we deny so many of our negative things and go into a whole toxic positivity thing, I think our conversation was such a refreshing change. I really appreciate the many, profound things that you put out so beautifully, and, to authentically admit where we are and how we keep going forward and keep coming back. And that is the journey. So it was really, really refreshing. So thank you so much for that. I'm definitely going to link your book. It is Yoga Sutras Simplified. For those of you who are interested to read it, we'll link it in the descriptions wherever you're listening in so that you can actually grab a copy. But thank you so much, Vasudev. I think this was very, very beautiful. Thank you so much for your time and valuable inputs.
Thank you, Shweta. a lot of fun. We met a few days ago. I enjoyed that coffee as well. And of course, right now, I appreciate the preparation you have done and the nice questions and the warmth that you have actually displayed. So thank you very much for inviting me to your wonderful show.
Thank you.